Something extremely dangerous is now unfolding in the Middle East, and it could affect the entire global economy. Iran has just made a threat that could shake the world oil market and possibly trigger the next global economic shock. Tehran says the blockade around the Strait of Hormuz will continue until attacks on Iran stop. This is not just another political warning. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important choke points in the entire global energy system. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply moves through this narrow passage between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Every day, massive oil tankers pass through this route, carrying energy from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates to the rest of the world. If that route becomes unsafe or completely blocked, the impact would be immediate. Oil prices could spike dramatically, and global markets would react within hours. Energy analysts have already warned that if the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted for a longer period, the price of oil could surge toward $120 or even $150 per barrel. That would not only increase fuel prices for millions of people, but could also push inflation higher across the world. And higher inflation combined with rising energy costs has historically been a recipe for economic slowdowns or even recessions. But the situation is becoming even more tense because the United States has responded with an extremely strong warning. Donald Trump said that if Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, the United States will strike Iran even harder. His message was direct. If Iran attempts to shut down the global oil supply route, Washington will respond with overwhelming force. That statement signals that the conflict may be entering a far more dangerous phase. Military analysts say that if the United States attempts to reopen the shipping lanes by force, it could lead to direct clashes between the U.S. Navy and Iranian naval forces in the Persian Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz is extremely narrow in some places, only about 33 kilometers wide. That means ships passing through it are highly vulnerable to mines, missiles, drones, and fast attack boats. Iran has spent decades preparing strategies to disrupt this route in case of war. These strategies include naval mines, anti-ship missiles, drone attacks, and swarm tactics using dozens of small, fast boats. Even a limited disruption could cause insurance companies to stop covering tanker traffic, which would effectively halt large parts of global oil shipments. And markets are already reacting. Energy traders around the world are watching the situation extremely closely because any signal of a prolonged blockade could send oil prices surging. Higher oil prices affect almost every part of the global economy. Transport costs rise, food prices increase, manufacturing becomes more expensive, and inflation can spread through the entire economic system. That is why the Strait of Hormuz is often described as the most important oil choke point in the world. But there is another story unfolding at the same time that reveals how the war is affecting people inside Iran. During an international football tournament in Australia, several players from the Iranian women's national soccer team reportedly escaped from their hotel. According to reports, 5 players asked for help from local authorities and refused to return with the Iranian delegation. The reason was political pressure. The players had previously refused to sing the Iranian national anthem and feared retaliation when they returned home. Reports say Iranian officials labeled them traitors and warned of consequences. Australian police helped the athletes, and the women have reportedly been granted humanitarian visas while their situation is reviewed. This story shows another dimension of the conflict. While military tensions grow in the region, internal pressure inside Iran is also increasing. Over the past few years, protests inside the country have shown deep divisions between the government and parts of the population, especially among younger generations and women. The current geopolitical crisis could intensify those tensions. And that brings us to the bigger question. What happens if this conflict continues to escalate? There are 3 possible global consequences that investors and governments are now watching very closely. The first is an energy shock. If oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz are disrupted even partially, global oil prices could surge rapidly. The second is a financial market reaction. Higher energy prices combined with geopolitical uncertainty often trigger stock market volatility and risk off behavior from investors. The third is broader geopolitical escalation. If U.S. forces attempt to reopen the shipping lanes and Iran responds militarily, the conflict could expand far beyond the current battlefield. That is why governments and financial markets around the world are watching every development in the Persian Gulf right now. The Strait of Hormuz may look like a small passage on the map, but its importance to the global economy is enormous. What happens there in the coming days could determine whether the world faces a temporary energy shock or the beginning of a much larger geopolitical crisis. And if oil prices spike dramatically, the consequences could reach far beyond the Middle East. From inflation and fuel prices to stock markets and global trade. This is why the world is now watching Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, and the next moves from Washington extremely closely. Because the next decision on either side could determine whether this crisis stabilizes or turns into something far bigger.